You know, as off-roading has gotten more popular over the years, there's now more options for communicating on the trail via radio than ever before. So if you're interested in using your radio on your next adventure, but you're not quite sure which one to buy, stick around, because on this episode, I'm going to be talking about some of the most popular radios used in off-road in hopes of helping you decide which one is best for you.
Yeah, Mr. 19, this is the Desert Chief and the White Raptor. We got ourselves a convoy. We got Smoking the Bear hot on our tail.
All right, so nobody actually talks like that anymore, but a lot of people still use radios off-road, and that's what we're talking about today. Hey guys, Matt McAdam here, aka Desert Chief, only on Driving Lines Chasing Dust. So some of you guys might already be familiar with the Pit Crew, but if you're not, the Nitto Pit Crew is basically a group of content creators that are running Nitto tires. And by the way, they're always taking applications for Nitto Pit Crew, so if you're running Nittos and you create a lot of content, I encourage you to apply. There's a lot of really cool perks. Last week, I actually got a box from Pit Crew that contained 2 radios in it. These are rugged GMR2 handheld radios, and as you can see, they got the Nitto logo right there on the front. This is a collaborated product. You can't buy this anywhere else. I was really stoked to get these because I love radios. I'm a radio geek, and that's what inspired this episode. So obviously, when I'm out on the trail, cell phones are not reliable. Most of the trails that I go on, I have little to no reception. I can't really rely on using those to talk to anybody else. Radios are a must to have on all my adventures, so I have several forms of them inside my truck at all times. So on this episode, I'm gonna go over handheld versus hard-mounted radios, and then give you some of the pros and cons of the different kinds of radios that are out there, because there's a lot out there right now. Back in the day, 30 years ago, all they had was CB, but nowadays there's a lot more options. It can get a little confusing, so let's get into it.
What's your 20? About 16 miles this side of Mississippi.
So I'm not gonna get into all the technical specs or the legal mumbo jumbo, because that video could be over 2 hours long. I'm just gonna go over a top level view of some of these different kinds of radios and how they pertain to being used off-road. So first up, let's talk about handheld versus hard-mounted radios like the one I've got in the Bronco. Some of the things that I absolutely love about handheld radios like this rugged radio that I've got here is that they're cost-effective, they're very, very easy to set up, there's no installation needed, no antennas mounted on the exterior of the vehicle. You can use them when you're spotting somebody outside the vehicle, or if you're hiking to go find somebody else, and you can lend them to your friends if they don't have a radio inside their vehicle. Now, obviously, there's a few drawbacks. These are running on battery power, which means that you have to be able to have backup batteries or a way to charge this overnight, because some of my trail rides, if we're transmitting on these all day long, the battery can run out before the trail is even over that day. So even on a single day trail, sometimes I need to carry extra batteries with me. And if I'm gonna be staying overnight, I definitely need a way to charge these up, because the batteries will run out if you're using these all day long. Now, the second drawback to these is that the antennas are very short. So as you can see, they're not gonna be putting out a ton of power, which means you're not gonna get a very far range compared to one of these radios that I have hard mounted here. Now, different radios will put out different power and different ranges, but for the most part, a handheld radio is not gonna have the same power or range as a hard-mounted radio inside your vehicle. All right, so next up, let's go over some of the pros and cons of all the different kinds of radios you're gonna find out there for off-road use. First and foremost, we're gonna go over CB radios, then FRS, then GMRS, then we're gonna go over ham or amateur radios, and then last but not least, race radios. Now, first up, we're gonna talk about CB and FRS radios. Now, you guys are probably familiar with CB radios. Nowadays, you don't really see CB radios out there on the trails as often as you used to. And then grouped in with that, I have the FRS radio, which is Family Radio Service. And this is kind of like an improved walkie-talkie. That's the best way that I can really describe it. I don't use a CB radio or an FRS radio when I'm off-roading. I'm gonna give you some of the pros and cons of each, however, in case you do wanna use them on your rig. First of all, they're cost-effective. CB and FRS radios are cheap. You can find them for usually under $100. You can just mount them inside your vehicle or use a handheld CB radio. FRS radios are always handheld. They're like walkie-talkies, basically. Another great thing about these radios is that they're very easy to use. You just turn them on, you set it to the channel number, and then the other person sets theirs to that channel number, and then you guys can talk. There's really no setup involved. There's no technicalities to it. It's very easy for the average person to just turn on and start using. So some of the drawbacks of CB and FRS radios is that they're not very powerful. So CB radios are mandated by the FCC to put out no more than 4 watts of power, and FRS radios are mandated to put out no more than 500 milliwatts of power. So that is going to be a pretty short range radio. I would say no more than a mile reliably. It's a little difficult to get anything more than that. It's just going to not come through very clearly. And then speaking of clarity, the voice that you may hear through those speakers is not going to be as clear as some of the better radios that we're going to get into. So keep that in mind. Sometimes the voices are muffled. You just don't hear them as well as you can on some of the different frequencies that you'll hear about later on in this video. And then last but not least, I don't really have any friends that still have a CB radio. So for me and my trail rides, they're pretty much useless. That may be different for you. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to be buying a radio, make sure that it's the same one that your friends got. Otherwise, it's practically useless out there. One of the most popular versions of handheld radios out there are GMRS radios like this Nitto radio from Rugged. GMRS, which stands for General Mobile Radio Service, is rated for up to 50 watts of power. So that's a lot more power than an FRS radio, and you can get better range out of them as well. You can also get better clarity out of these radios because of how much more power they put out. So you can hear people very clearly on these radios. It's really popular out there on the trails. I see a lot of people having these, and that's really the reason why I like carrying them in mind, because if I'm going on a trail ride with people I don't really know, chances are if they have a communication device inside their vehicle, it's probably going to be a GMRS radio. GMRS radios do have preset channels on them, so they're very easy to use and set up. You just click over to the channel that everybody else is on, and boom, you can talk to them and they can hear you as well. Another great feature of GMRS radios is that they give you access to radio repeaters, and repeaters are basically radio systems that are mounted oftentimes on a mountain peak somewhere around you, and when you use those, you can actually broadcast your transmission to that repeater, which will then get broadcasted over a much wider area to anybody who's listening on that repeater's channel. And that really opens you up for a much bigger range than just from one radio to another. Now, whether you're using a handheld version of a GMRS radio or a hard-mounted mobile setup inside your vehicle, there are still some drawbacks. Firstly, they are more expensive than FRS and CB radios, so keep that in mind. I think it's well worth it for the features that you get out of these, but they are more expensive. Now, keep in mind, if you're going to use a GMRS radio, you do need an FCC license to operate this. It's very easy to get. You go on their website, you register with the FCC, you pay a $35 service fee, and then that license is good for up to 10 years. So it's a really easy process. However, you do need to do it to legally operate one of these radios. Most of these do have a listen-only feature so that you can type in whatever frequency you want, but you can't transmit on that frequency. You can just listen to it. That's how this Rugged radio works as well. If you want to transmit, you have a predefined set of channels that you can use with other people, and you just go on there, like I said, and then you guys can talk to each other. So it's pretty easy to use, but you are limited on the channels you can operate on. Next, we're going to talk about ham radios. So ham radios or amateur radios, this is what I've got inside my Bronco. I have a mobile ham setup inside of here, and this is what I primarily use when I'm communicating out on the trails. So there's a lot of really great benefits to ham radios, and then there's some barriers that we're gonna get into here in a minute. Now, most importantly, ham radios are very, very powerful radios. They're rated to up to 1500 watts by the FCC. Now, no mobile setup is gonna be putting out that much power. However, I can put up to 75 watts out of the radio that I've got in my rig, and that allows me to talk over very long distances with other people. I've actually been able to communicate with somebody up to 40 miles away with the radio that's inside my Bronco to their radio with no problem, and they sounded like they were just 10 feet away from me, mainly due to the amount of power that I can put out of that radio and the external antenna that I've got here on the A-pillar. Now, if you're using a handheld ham radio, you can get a lot better range out of that as well. They are still limited because of how much power they can put out with the battery. However, in terms of performance, they are some of the best radios out there in a handheld or a mobile setup like the one I've got here on the Bronco. Now, additionally, ham radios are open to any frequency you want, so you can actually tune them to the exact megahertz of whatever channel you want to go on, and then you can actually use your radio on that channel. There's no presets on there. However, you can program them on your own, but you can actually dial that to whatever megahertz you want, and that for me is really great because I can move from one frequency to the next pretty easily. Another huge benefit that we talked about earlier is your access to repeaters. So I actually use ham repeaters specifically on 2-meter band all the time around here. There are repeaters here on the mountains locally. There's one out on Catalina Island, and you can actually get over a range of 200 to 300 miles using a repeater. But all that great stuff about ham radios comes with a price. And first of all, they are much more expensive than GMRS or any of the other radios we've mentioned so far. So keep that in mind if you're trying to get into ham radios. The cost definitely goes up. Secondly, they also require an FCC license. However, it's not as easy as just going on there and registering. You actually have to take an exam. You have to pass that exam. Then you get a license and a call sign that's good for up to 10 years. I got my ham radio license when I was 23 years old. So mine's actually up for renewal this year. So I'm gonna go back and redo the test. That also means that anybody else you wanna use a ham radio with, like your friends out on the trail, need to be ham licensed. So that's another barrier for people is they don't want to go out and take that exam and then get their license to use a ham radio, which is why a lot of them use the GMRS option instead. Now, ham radios do require a lot of knowledge and experience in using them because you want to make sure you're doing it safely and legally. There are channels that are used by emergency operations. You cannot transmit on those. You have to make sure that you know which channel you're on, how to get to those channels, using some of the features of the radio. A lot of these things require formal education or training on how to use them, and that can definitely be difficult for someone who's just trying to go off-roading every other weekend. So lastly today, we're going to talk about race radios, and that's probably a term you've heard before because race radios are primarily marketed towards off-roaders. You can think of a race radio as somewhat of a hybrid between a GMRS radio and a ham radio, but they're primarily used by off-road racing organizations and race teams. Some of the benefits of race radios include being able to listen in on some of the happenings around off-road motorsports events. So if you're going out to King of the Hammers or you're going out to Baja to listen or watch the race, if you bring a race radio along with you, the chances are some of those teams are going to be on there, or the organization as a whole is going to be using that channel. So you can kind of follow along or listen in from wherever you're watching the race. They're pretty easy to use. You just turn them on and tune to whatever channel that's predetermined on there, like Baja Pits or Mag 7 or Checkers or Weatherman, and you'll usually hear some stuff going on around the race. Now for me, one of the biggest drawbacks of using a race radio and why I don't actually use one in my rig is because oftentimes when I go out places, there's a lot of people using race radios, and that means there's a lot of chatter on whatever channel I'm using that day. And that can make it really hard to communicate with your friends if you're listening to somebody else's conversation the whole time as well.
I read you loud and clear, 10-4.
So I know a lot of this is confusing, but I really hope this video helps you guys narrow down the different types of radios that are out there and available to you so that you can make a better decision when it comes time to buying a radio for you and your adventures. I do want to remind you guys that the FCC has the final word on anything radio, so just make sure you do your research and you guys know the laws and you know all the regulations and make sure that you're operating safely out there. But that's going to wrap things up for this episode, you guys. Thanks for watching, and be sure you like, comment, and subscribe to Driving Line. And once again, this has been your host, Matt McAdam, aka Desert Chief, only on Driving Line's Chasing Dust. And as always, I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching Driving Line. If you guys like this video, consider subscribing to our channel so you'll never miss any of the content we create here. Whether you're into trucks, Jeeps, imports, domestic vehicles, or anything in between, we are here to fuel your passion. So hit that subscribe button and we'll see you guys next time.